Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
We're continuing our reading of Srimad Bhagavatam. We're at Canto 3, Chapter 15, Description of the Kingdom of God. Taking up at text 46. You're hired. The Kumaras said, "O dear Lord, you are not manifested to rascals, even though you are seated within the heart of everyone. But as far as we are concerned, we see you face to face, although you are unlimited. The statements we have heard about you from our father, Brahma, through the ears have now been actually realized by your kind appearance." So-called yogis who concentrate their mind or meditate upon the impersonal or void are described here. This verse of Srimad Bhagavatam describes persons who are expected to be very expert yogis, engaged in meditation, but who do not find the Supreme Personality of Godhead seated within the heart. These persons are described here as Duratma. Described as what?
Duratma.
20 points to everybody. Which means a person who has a very crooked heart, or a less intelligent person, just the opposite to a Mahatma, which means one who has a broad heart. Those so-called yogis who, although engaged in meditation, are not broad-hearted, cannot find the four-handed Narayan form, even though he is seated within their heart. Although the first realization of the Supreme Absolute Truth is impersonal Brahman, one should not remain satisfied with experiencing the impersonal effulgence of the Supreme Lord. In the Ishopanishad also, the devotee prays that the glaring effulgence of Brahman may be removed from his eyes, so that he can see the real personal feature of the Lord and thus satisfy himself fully. Similarly, although the Lord is not visible in the beginning because of his glaring bodily effulgence, if a devotee sincerely wants to see him, the Lord is revealed to him. It is said in Bhagavad Gita that the Lord cannot be seen by our imperfect eyes. He cannot be heard by our imperfect ears, and he cannot be experienced by our imperfect senses. But if one engages in devotional service with faith and devotion, then God reveals himself. Here the four sages, Sanat Kumara, Sanatana, Sanandana, and Sanak, are described as actually sincere devotees. Although they had heard from their father Brahma about the personal feature of the Lord, only the impersonal feature Brahman was revealed to them. But because they were sincerely searching for the Lord, they finally saw his personal feature directly, which corresponded with the description given by their father. They thus became fully satisfied. Here they express their gratitude because although they were foolish impersonalists in the beginning, by the grace of the Lord, they could now have the good fortune to see his personal feature. Another significant aspect of this verse is that the sages describe their experience of hearing from their father, Brahma, who was born of the Lord directly. In other words, the disciplic succession from the Lord to Brahma, and from Brahma to Narada, and from Narada to Vyasa, and so on, is accepted here. Because the Kumaras were sons of Brahma, they had the opportunity to learn Vedic knowledge from the disciplic succession of Brahma, and therefore, in spite of their impersonalist beginnings, they became, in the end, direct seers of the personal feature of the Lord. Text 47, we know that you are the Supreme Absolute Truth, the personality of Godhead who manifests his transcendental form in the uncontaminated mode of pure goodness. This transcendental eternal form of your personality can be understood only by your mercy, through unflinching devotional service, by great sages whose hearts have been purified in the devotional way. Purport, the Absolute Truth can be understood in three features: impersonal Brahman, localized Paramatma, and Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Here it is admitted that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the last word in understanding the Absolute Truth. Even though the four Kumaras were instructed by their great learned father Brahma, they could not actually understand the Absolute Truth. They could only understand the Supreme Absolute Truth when they personally saw the Personality of Godhead with their own eyes. In other words, if one sees or understands the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the other two features of the Absolute Truth, namely impersonal Brahman and localized Paramatma, are also automatically understood. Therefore, the Kumaras confirm, you are the ultimate Absolute Truth. The impersonalists may argue that since the Supreme Personality of Godhead was so nicely decorated, he was therefore not the Absolute Truth. But here it is confirmed that all the variegatedness of the Absolute Platform is constituted of Shuddha Sattva, pure goodness. In the material world, any quality, goodness, passion, or ignorance is contaminated. Even the quality of goodness here in the material world is not free from tinges of passion and ignorance. But in the transcendental world, only pure goodness, without any tinge of passion or ignorance, exists. Therefore, the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his variegated pastimes and paraphernalia are all pure sattva guna. Such variegatedness in pure goodness is exhibited eternally by the Lord for the satisfaction of the devotee. The devotee does not want to see the Supreme Personality of God, Supreme Absolute Truth in voidness or impersonalism. In one sense, absolute transcendental variegatedness is meant only for the devotees, not for others, because this distinct feature of transcendental variegatedness can be understood only by the mercy of the Supreme Lord and not by mental speculation or the ascending process. It is said that one can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead when one is even slightly favored by him. Tapite deva patambujatoya. Otherwise, without his mercy, a man may speculate for thousands of years and not understand what is actually the Absolute Truth. This mercy can be perceived by the devotee when he is completely freed from contamination. It is stated, therefore, that only when all contamination is rooted out and the devotee is completely detached from material attractions can he receive this mercy of the Lord. Persons who are very expert and most intelligent in understanding things as they are engage in hearing narrations of the auspicious activities and pastimes of the Lord, which are worth chanting and worth hearing. Such persons do not care even for the highest material benediction, namely liberation, to say nothing of other less important benedictions, like the material happiness of the heavenly kingdom. Purport. The transcendental bliss enjoyed by the devotees of the Lord is completely different from the material happiness enjoyed by less intelligent persons. The less intelligent persons in the material world are engaged by the four principles of benediction called dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Generally, they prefer to take to religious life to achieve some material benediction, the purpose of which is to satisfy the senses. When by that process they become confused or frustrated in fulfilling the maximum amount of sense enjoyment, they try to become one with the Supreme, which is, according to their conception, mukti or liberation. There are 5 kinds of liberation, the least important of which is called sayuja, to become one with the Supreme. Devotees don't care for such liberation because they are actually intelligent, nor are they inclined to accept any of the other 4 kinds of liberation, namely to live on the same planet as the Lord, to live with him side by side as an associate, to have the same opulence, and to attain the same bodily features. They are concerned only with glorifying the Supreme Lord and his auspicious activities. Pure devotional service is Shravanam Kirtanam. Pure devotees who take transcendental pleasure in hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord do not care for any kind of liberation. Even if they are offered the 5 liberations, they refuse to accept them. As stated in the Bhagavatam in the 3rd canto, Materialistic persons aspire for the sense enjoyment of heavenly pleasure in the heavenly kingdom, but devotees reject such material pleasure at once. The devotee does not even care for the post of Indra. A devotee knows that any pleasurable material position is subject to be annihilated at a certain point. Even if one reaches the post of Indra, Chandra, or any other demigod, he must be dissolved at a certain stage. A devotee is never interested in such temporary pleasure. From Vedic scriptures it is understood that sometimes even Brahma and Indra fall down, but a devotee in the transcendental abode of the Lord never falls. This transcendental stage of life in which one feels transcendental pleasure in hearing the Lord's pastimes is also recommended by Lord Chaitanya. When Lord Chaitanya was talking with Ramananda Roy, there were varieties of suggestions offered by Ramananda regarding spiritual realization, but Lord Chaitanya rejected all of them that one should hear. But Lord Chaitanya rejected all but one, that one should hear the glories of the Lord in association with pure devotees. That is acceptable for everyone, especially in this age. One should engage himself in hearing from pure devotees about the activities of the Lord. That is considered the supreme benediction for mankind. 49. O Lord, we pray that you let us be born in any hellish condition of life, just as long as our hearts and minds are always engaged in the service of your lotus feet. Our words are made beautiful by speaking of your activities, just as tulsi leaves are beautified when offered unto your lotus feet, and as long as our ears are always filled with the chanting of your transcendental qualities. Purport. The four sages now offer their humility to the Supreme Personality of Godhead because of their having been haughty in cursing two other devotees of the Lord. Jai and Vijay, the two doorkeepers who checked him from entering the Vaikuntha planet, were certainly offenders, but as Vaishnavas, the four sages should not have cursed them in anger. After the incident, they became conscious that they had done wrong by cursing the devotees of the Lord, and they prayed to the Lord that even in the hellish condition of life, their minds might not be distracted from the engagement of service to the lotus feet of Narayan. Those who are devotees of the Lord are not afraid of any condition of life, provided there is constant engagement in the service of the Lord. It is said of the Narayana Para, or those who are devotees of Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Nakutash Chanda Bhibyati. That's from Bhagavatam 6:17-28. They are not afraid of entering a hellish condition, but since they are engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, heaven or hell is the same for them. In material life, both heaven and hell are one and the same, because they are material. In either place, there is no engagement in the Lord's service. Therefore, those who are engaged in the service of the Lord see no distinction between heaven and hell. It is only the materialists who prefer one to the other. These four devotees prayed to the Lord that although they might go to hell because they had cursed devotees, they might not forget the service of the Lord. The transcendental loving service of the Lord is performed in three ways: with the body, with the mind, and with the words. Here the sages pray that their words may always be engaged in glorifying the Supreme Lord. One may speak very nicely with ornamental language, or one may be expert at controlled grammatical presentation, but if one's words are not engaged in the service of the Lord, they have no flavor and no actual use. The example is given here of tulsi leaves. The tulsi leaf is very useful even from the medicinal or antiseptic point of view. It is considered sacred and is offered to the lotus feet of the Lord. The tulsi leaf has numerous good qualities, but if it were not offered to the lotus feet of the Lord, tulsi could not be of much value or importance. Similarly, one may speak very nicely from the rhetorical or grammatical point of view, which may be very much appreciated by a materialistic audience. But if one's words are not offered to the service of the Lord, they are useless. The holes of the ears are very small and can be filled with any insignificant sound. So how can they receive as great a vibration as the glorification of the Lord? The answer is that the holes of the ears are like the sky. As the sky can never be filled up, the quality of the ear is such that one may go on pouring in vibrations of various kinds, yet it is capable of receiving more and more vibrations. A devotee is not afraid of going to hell if he has the opportunity to hear the glories of the Lord constantly. This is the advantage of chanting Hare Kṛṣṇa, Hare Kṛṣṇa, Kṛṣṇa Kṛṣṇa, Hare Hare, Hare Rāma, Hare Rāma, Rāma Rāma, Hare Hare. One may be put in any condition, but God gives him the prerogative to chant Hare Kṛṣṇa. In any condition of life, if one goes on chanting, he will never be unhappy. O Lord, we therefore offer our respectful obeisances unto your eternal form as the personality of Godhead, which you have so kindly manifested before us. Your supreme eternal form cannot be seen by unfortunate, less intelligent persons, but we are so much satisfied in our mind and vision to see it. The four sages were impersonalists in the beginning of their spiritual life, but afterwards, by the grace of their father and spiritual master Brahma, they understood the eternal spiritual form of the Lord and felt completely satisfied. In other words, the transcendentalists who aspire to the impersonal Brahman or localized Paramatma are not fully satisfied and still hanker for more. Even if they are satisfied in their minds, still transcendentally their eyes are not satisfied. But as soon as such persons come to realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they are satisfied in all respects. In other words, they become devotees and want to see the form of the Lord continually. It is confirmed by the Brahma Samhita that one who has developed transcendental love of Krishna by smearing his eyes with the ointment of love sees constantly the eternal form of the Lord. The particular word used in this connection, anatmanam, signifies those who have no control over the mind and senses, and who therefore speculate and want to become one with the Lord. Such persons cannot have the pleasure of seeing the eternal form of the Lord. For the impersonalists and the so-called yogis, the Lord is always hidden by the curtain of Yogamaya. Bhagavad Gita says that even when Lord Krishna was seen by everyone while he was present on the surface of the earth, the impersonalists and the so-called yogis could not see him because they were devoid of devotional eyesight. The theory of the impersonalists and so-called yogis is that the Supreme Lord assumes a particular form when he comes in touch with Maya, although actually he has no form. This very conception of the impersonalists and so-called yogis checks them from seeing the Supreme Personality of Godhead as he is. The Lord, therefore, is always beyond the sight of such non-devotees. The four sages felt so much obliged to the Lord that they offered their respectful obeisances unto him again and again. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the third canto, 15th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Description of the Kingdom of God. Bravo! Bravissimo! Sadhu, sadhu! Tavakatamritam tapta jivanam kavibiriditam kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimaratatam Bhuvigranantiye Buddhidajana. Well, here we are. Chapter 16, the two doorkeepers of Vaikuntha, Jai and Vijay, cursed by the sages. These very chapters read personally by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Gadadhar Pandit. Spent time at Tota Gopinath doing the same activity, hearing again and again the pastimes of the Lord from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Would you like to make any comments or
devotees about the activities of the Lord? That is considered supreme benediction for mankind. So I was just feeling grateful to being in this assembly where we had this opportunity about this line Prabhupada says and put in that we have opportunity to hear the glories of the Lord in association of pure devotees. So thank you for creating this, and I could see that how it is really so beneficial.
Thank you for being so enthusiastic to participate. Krishna.
Guru Maharaj, I really like these prayers. It is coming from impersonalists, and then they become devotees. So it so much says that you are unlimited, and now how can we see your face? How can we see you face to face? It says you are pure, uncontaminated mode of goodness, and then so much of in that context that they're coming from impersonalist point of view and offering these prayers, and that was one reflection. And I have one question also, that it feels so nice reading here, but same we don't get when I will go back to and have a personal reading. It is not that, like, it doesn't feel that it is same reading, but reading here is different. And how can we have same, like,
Do you
I will
read
not say
together?
ecstasy, but
Do you two read together?
no.
That's why. You're supposed to read together. Find a time and then read like 5 verses each back and forth, and you'll see it's very nice. I also like to read by myself too sometimes, or regularly. I have time to just like concentrate on what's on the page, get a quiet place, and I use those times to mark the places that I want to go back to. Anyway, I appreciate the sentiment. It is special, and that's why we get these programs together. That's why the sages at Naimisaranya had a seminar, so they could be together. You get power in numbers. Shami Praj, did you figure out how much time it was before? Okay.
I was appreciating something of Srila Prabhupada's that I've noted a few times. In verse 48, Srila basically paraphrases Saloka Sarshi Samipya, the verse from the late 3rd canto where Kapila Dev says that my devotees don't accept. They never accept, what is it called? Sayuja. But they don't accept the other 4 if it's aside from service to me. But I've noted that Srila Prabhupada, when he refers to that point, he takes like a really hard line. He says, actually, they don't accept the liberation, the devotional liberations, even the 4 Sarupya, Samipya, Sarshti, and Salokya. And I can't read his mind, but my sense of it, because he's so consistent with how he presents that, is that he really wanted to make it clear that we shouldn't have a fruitive mentality in our devotional service. That, yeah, I do this service, but what I really want is like Sarshti or Samipya or something. Because the verse literally says in the late 3rd canto that they don't accept it aside from my service. If it's part of the service, they'll accept it. But only because the service is the main thing that they have. But Prabhupada says they don't even worry about it. They don't even go there. So I'm just appreciating how it seems like he's really careful with us to make sure that we don't bring, our karmic tendencies, our mercantile thinking into devotional service. And okay, if these things come later in very late in devotional service, these kinds of liberations, so be it. But we really have to have a purity of intention. He says that again in this section, in the 48th purport, with regards to the Kumaras. Just my sense.
Mama Janmani Janmanishvare
Yeah.
is the standard for the devotee. Madhuri, and then we'll go 1, 2.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, I had a question regarding the purport from the 47th verse. It says that even the quality of goodness here in the material world is not free from tinges of passion and ignorance. And while I understand this intrinsically to some extent, I'm having a hard time adding an example to something that is goodness but may have tinges of passion, because the first thing that comes to my mind is like service, because oftentimes it's done in the mode of goodness, but how could passion or ignorance?
Well, Krishna explains in the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that the modes of nature are always mixed because they're competing for supremacy. And even if somebody has goodness, then it can be overcome by passion. But then there's what's above the 3 modes of material nature, Shuddha Sattva, which is a transcendental position achieved by devotional service. And later in Kapila Dev's teachings, he describes devotional service that's affected by ignorance, by passion, and by goodness. That is mundane goodness. And then he describes what is transcendental devotional service. So you gave the example of hearing and chanting. And there may be ways in which somebody's performing devotional service, but it has some effect from the modes of nature. But when it reaches a certain point, which is described in the Bhagavatam, in that paragraph that says, Nashtaparishu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Tada Rajas Tamo Bhava Kama Lubadayaschaye Cheta Iter Anavidam Stitam Sattve Prasidati. So in this verse, that sattve that's being mentioned is not ordinary goodness, but it's Shuddha Sattva. And there's a progressive way in which, even as one's performing devotional service, as an example, Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam, one is performing devotional service and there's a consideration that it's still affected by some lower modes of nature. But there's a point at which Mamchayo Vyabhicharena Bhakti Yogena Sevate Sagunan Samatityaitan Brahmabhuya Yakalpate, crosses over into devotional service. It's not tinged at all by the modes of material nature. Did it answer your question? Really?
Yeah, I guess a follow-up question would be, if we were to, for example, be engaged in service and our intention is coming from a pure place, but then perhaps the way we execute it, would that also be influenced by...
But we didn't execute it?
The way that it's executed, could that also be influenced by passion and ignorance?
Yes, we could be influenced by some mode of material nature when we're performing devotional service, in which case it would be mixed. For instance, Nriga, he did some service, but the acharyas say that he was definitely affected by the modes of nature in his service, because they say, look at the way he appreciates himself. He didn't have a completely pure intention or consciousness, even though he's meeting the Lord face to face. He's still affected by some contamination.
Hare Kṛṣṇa Maharaj, in verse 46 there is a purport of Prabhupada that says that although they had heard from their father Brahma about the personal feature of the Lord, only the impersonal feature Brahman was revealed to them. But because they were sincerely searching for the Lord, they finally saw his personal feature directly. So,
I didn't hear the last sentence. Can you read the last sentence again?
Okay. Only the impersonal feature Brahman was revealed to them. But because they were sincerely searching for the Lord, they finally saw his personal feature directly, which corresponded with the description given by their father.
Yes?
So, I had a question in the beginning, like if they were impersonalists, the four Kumaras, how did they gain entrance into the Vaikunthas?
They walked right in. They're little babies. They didn't go right into Vaikuntha. They got to the gate of Vaikuntha. That was the seventh gate. Hadn't gone all the way in anyways. But there's even Durvasa Muni got all the way up there. He just couldn't stay. Just continuing with your thought process. In the Madhurya Kandamini, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes how in the progressive increase of Shraddha, which is mostly what he's talking about, Ado Shraddha Tata Sarasangata Bhajana Kriya, Tato Nartan Nivriti Satato Nishtas Ruchis Tata, he says that at every level, even the most advanced levels of bhava, there's still some traces of aparadha. And then he describes how when one comes to prema, it's almost completely finished, but when there's prema and one sees the Lord face to face, then it's completely finished. So there is a way in which, in the progressive development of pure devotional service, there can be some tinge, and then it gradually is diminished until it's completely gone. Shuddha sattva, sattvam vishuddham vasudeva shabditam yadiyate tatra puman apavrita. From that position, Lord Shiva says, I can see him all the time. Sattvam vishuddham, when it's Shuddha sattva, sattvam vishuddham vasudeva shabditam yadiyate tatra puman apavrita, then he's uncovered. You can see him always because you're in that position. I'm just checking outside. It's Deva Vrata and then Prabhupada Priya, and then we're coming back right here to our home team of Radhakri.
Hare Kṛṣṇa Guru Maharaj, on this point of devotional service being performed in the different modes of nature, it seems like it's possible because devotional life is so much pervaded by...
Seems like it's possible because you've been in ISKCON for a while. Go ahead.
It's so pervaded by the mode of goodness that it seems like it could be an obstacle, even just the comfort and the satisfaction which comes from the mode of goodness, which could potentially obstruct one's determination to go beyond that mode of goodness. You often speak about fear of the fade, so I'm just thinking how the mode of goodness could potentially be our fade, because even with the mode of goodness, it's hinged by other modes, and there's a chance to kind of go down. So how do we not get comfortable in the mode of goodness, but utilize it as a springboard rather than a couch?
There's only one answer. You have to have association with a completely pure devotee. That's why Prahlad Maharaj and then in 5th canto, Ruganai Tapasa Nayati Nachejaya Nirvapanad Grihadva Nachandasa Naiva Griha Jalagni Shurya Vina Mahat Padarajo Bhishekam Nishkinchananam. How's the other one start? Naisham Matist. I can't eat candy and do this at the same time.
Matistava Urukranangrim.
Sprishat Yanarta Pagamo Yadartaha Mahiyasam Padarajo Bhishekam Nishkinchananam Navranita Yavat. All these verses in Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said to Sanatana Goswami, his beginning teachings are all that. He includes those verses, and he says, you're not able to come to pure devotional service without taking the dust of the feet of a completely pure devotee and bathing in it, dedicating your life. That's the only way to come out of all the three modes of material nature. Let's get the mercy of a pure devotee. Okay, Prabhupada Priya.
Hare Kṛṣṇa. I was reflecting on this, that the Kumaras were saying that doesn't matter if they're in heaven or hell as long as they get the chance to hear about Krishna and speak about him and be engaged in service. And I was kind of reflecting on the concept, this Swarga Pavarga Narakeshva Pitulya Tadarshana, in my own life. Because I lived in Vrindavan for 10 years, and then we shifted over to Mayapur for another 9 years, and now I'm back in the West. I was in Gainesville, now I'm in Dallas. And so often devotees, they always say, oh, well, did you feel any significant effect on your Krishna consciousness when you left the Dham and went back to the West? And honestly, I didn't. It was just totally the same. I mean, it's a different flavor, because it's a different environment, a different culture, but as far as my Krishna consciousness and my happiness, it made no difference whatsoever, because wherever I am, I'm doing the same things, chanting Hare Kṛṣṇa, serving Krishna, associating with devotees, morning program, preaching. So, but then I was thinking, well, what does cause a change in my happiness? What does cause me to be distressed or something? And the main thing is when relationships with devotees are strained.
Are what? Strained?
Strained. There's some misunderstanding, some hard feelings. That's really the only cause of unhappiness that I can really think of. So therefore, whenever there's some difficulty in a relationship, I just prioritize that. Just put aside everything else and be like, all right, I need to talk to this person, I need to figure this out and talk it through and come to some understanding.
It's a really helpful revelation, especially knowing your history, and then I like the strategy. So important to deal with interpersonal conflict as directly as possible and as soon as possible. Otherwise, I agree that it can become the greatest source of consternation. We have Radha Kripa.
Hare Kṛṣṇa Maharaj. Maharaj, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, so many prayers, and these prayers are offered at unique circumstances by very special personalities, and some are, I think their personalities are unique in it itself, with maybe some tinge of some background, which is, we may find it, is that appropriate to be in Srimad Bhagavatam, it is being referred. So what is the mood through which we should look into all these prayers? Because all prayers raising from Brahma
Radha Raman Prabhu gives a really excellent class about this. And he describes how he was a child. Of course, he learned to read from the Bhagavatam. Radha Raman. You know who he is? Yeah. And he was saying when he was a kid and his mother was teaching him how to read, and also they would read the Bhagavatam regularly. And the storyline would be going, and he would go, yeah, and then the prayers would start. He'd go, oh no, not again. More prayers. And he said as he developed in his hearing in the Srimad Bhagavatam and heard he began to hear the prayers as the unique realizations of each one of the devotees. And then he posed this question, what would it be like if there weren't any prayers in the Bhagavatam? It was just the Leela, and then you didn't hear what the devotees were feeling in the Leela. And the Bhagavatam really is about devotees and their relationship with Krishna. So how do you know what their relationship is until you hear what they're saying from their heart? And that's how they express themselves to the Lord. And that's how we know what it feels like to be a devotee. Nagapatni's famous prayers and the nuance of their realization as the wives of a scoundrel are just amazing. And you go through any of them and really relate to them. Gajendra's prayers, where he apologizes that most of your pure devotees don't ask for help, but I have a crocodile on my leg presently, and I don't know what else to do. We can relate to all those things, and that's where we actually find out about what it feels like for these devotees, for the pure devotees who are in the Leela. Does that help? Okay. Krishna Saka's fired up over there. He's got something.
I have a question. So about what Prabhupada Priya Mataji was saying, when I have that thing like strained relationship or there is something going on with devotees, I can't go and directly clear it up. I feel like, okay, shut it, and I don't feel like going and talking and clearing it up, because it's too much strain on my head and thinking and everything. So I feel like, no, I don't want to do it. I'll just run away from that. I don't know. Do you have any what in those cases? What should I do?
Well, if you're not directly involved, you don't have to fix everything. You can always just go on book distribution. Go traveling Sankirtan out to Yellowstone Park. Have a little kitri. Things tend to work themselves out over time, but if you're involved directly, it's a great idea. If you learn how to do it, there are ways that you can learn how to confront difficult situations, and those are really important because our human interactions are the mainstay of our movement. And if we don't know how to do that, then it may be a very dry kind of community experience. Devotees don't know how to overcome interpersonal conflict. My theory is that the most advanced of communities are the ones that have learned how to come together and discuss differences and overcome them. And there are plenty, not just plenty, they're constant. Because human beings are souls, and they also have, from that point of view, they have individuality. And then from the point of view of their svabhava, they have different modes of nature, different cultures, everything. So there's unlimited opportunity for misunderstanding. And it's in coming to grips with that and then dealing with it in the ways that Krishna recommends in the Bhagavad Gita. And there are ways, modern ways to apply that. I mean, not that those aren't, they're perennial, so it's not modern or ancient, but there are responsible ways of dealing with conflict so that you don't have to be afraid. One of the talks Radhika gave was about forgiveness. It's not directly about what I'm saying, but there are specific ways to ask for forgiveness or to give forgiveness. And there are specific ways not to also. Like, yeah, I forgive you for whatever you think I did to you, or something like that. Whatever you perceived I did wrong, yeah, sorry. I'm sorry for, whatever you thought I did wrong. There are very, not only awkward, but disingenuous ways that, so if in a community or in a family, which is a small community, you're able to figure out how to work on these things. Through practice, it becomes a joyful environment because devotees, that's where the foundation of trust is built. We trust that we can talk to one another and overcome these things. And we don't have to make ultimatums, and we don't have to go into silos and then become political, because then you don't really have what we want, which is love and trust. So if you ever have a problem, let me know. I have some experience because I have to deal with this all the time. And I feel more and more confident that dealing directly with the things that I'm squeamish about is the path to peace, or at least sleeping for a good 6.5 hours in one night. Narada.
There's actually a lyric from a song that I think about all the time when I have this feeling of kind of this feeling in the heart of it's this subtle harboring, And this lyric is very beautiful. It says, "Cold silence has the tendency to atrophy any sense of compassion."
Wow.
Cold silence has the tendency to atrophy any sense of compassion. And so I think about that whenever I feel that, and then it's really difficult, but when I reflect on that, I think this is a way for me to progress. Very beautiful statement.
Boy, just the phrase cold silence, it sounds injurious, doesn't it? Cold silence has
has the tendency to atrophy any sense of compassion. The whole song is called Schism. It's about the problem of people not being able to communicate with each other.
Well, there's a saying that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. Any other thoughts, realizations? Yes. Hare Kṛṣṇa.
There was a more contemporary past of Madhusudan Saraswati, who was a Mayavadi sannyasi, and by the Samvit Shakti of the Lord, he got entrance to Vrindavan Dham, and once he entered, he completely transformed himself and became a bhakti yogi. So this whole pastime seems a similar, you could say it's a similar pastime where the four Kumaras, they enter Vaikuntha, and then by the Samvit Shakti of the Lord, they inhale the fragrance, and then they're completely transformed.
Transformation. I have a friend, God brother, who had chanted Hare Kṛṣṇa for some years, and then went through a rough period in life, felt that, okay, maybe the process is effective, but it's not having an effect on me. And gradually gave up the chanting, and then started practicing meditation to see if he could break through. And he got quite good at meditation. But then he got an opportunity after many years to come to Vrindavan. And he told me how he came to Vrindavan and he sat down to meditate and he couldn't do it. But then he just tried chanting Hare Kṛṣṇa, and all of a sudden the flow started again. He thought, I can't meditate here, but I can chant Hare Kṛṣṇa. And so it's Vrindavan, in the Dham, there's a special influence of Krishna's internal potency that inspires devotion, obviously. Anything else? Okay, it is time for a little break. We're going to come back here at 10 minutes after 5, and we're going to enter into the two doorkeepers of Vaikuntha, Jai and Vijay, cursed by the sages. So it is only 37 verses, and we might be able to finish. Yeah. You don't think we can do it now?
Oh, we can do it now.
It's, let's see, 7:11. All right, come right back. Gaur Premanande Haribol.